What's the best notch to use falling trees? Is it the Humboldt? Is it the open face, conventional notched, or no notch at all? Let's discuss this on this edition of Along the ForestApps Road. Hi everyone, it's Tim Ard and welcome to this edition. We hope that you will be interested in what we have to talk about today. We're going to be doing a little bit of stump work. We're going to be discussing whether or not face notch is necessary, and really what's the best one. In other words, is the Humboldt preferred and why? Is the common notch or conventional notch preferred, or is the open face a big advantage? Is it something that people understand, or maybe no face notch at all? I don't know. So we're going to be discussing these things and more on this edition of Along the ForestApps Road. We're discussing things of chainsaw, whether it be applications or safety. That's what we do here. So if that interests you, please hang around and subscribe so that we can stay in touch with you and you with us on the different topics of chainsaw. But what's your best experience as far as face notches go? Is it the Humboldt notch? We see a lot of that from West Coast operators as well as Canadians, and those are used in a lot of the larger tree areas. The Humboldt has been around for many, many years. I had heard the story that it had come from Humboldt County, California, back in the early 1900s. Very popular because it didn't have to be rebutted on the large trees going to the mill. It didn't have as much top damage on the trees because basically the larger trees would slide off of the notch and the butt would hit, and then the top with a lot less breakage and fracturing. And then the other thing is that it kind of locked to the stump pretty well. And so there was a lot of advantages to it. And so that's the reason why it became quite a common usage out on the West Coast. But the first notches that came about were called the common or the standard notch. The Forest Service called it conventional notch. It's usually written up to be about a third of the tree in, about 1/5 of the tree high as far as diameter goes, and more or less it makes a notch of about 45 degrees. And so that 45-degree notch gave the ability for the tree to move about 45 degrees in the notch's direction before it actually broke or severed the hinge off. And so the back cut would end up with a hinge coming up to that face notch, and that's how it operated. The Humboldt also usually had a level back cut, and that being because the tree butt kind of locked onto the stump with the undercut coming closed. It didn't butt rebound quite as much, and the hinge really in most cases stayed there with it until the face notch closed, which was usually somewhere between 45 and 90 degrees according to the diameter of the tree and how far the sawyer would go into the face. But it also then became an issue with the common notch, that when that face notch closed, you had a high chance of butt rebound. In other words, if you think about how the stem of the tree falling at about a 45-degree position, when that hinge let go, it had the ability of coming backwards over the stump. It didn't lock on quite as well as the Humboldt. And so it created some real issues out there with the butt rebounds coming back to the operator's escape zone. And so they quickly came up with what they called a stump shot. A stump shot is the back cut coming in at a higher level to be able to take and lock that tree butt onto the stump a little bit. But still we find, especially in smaller diameters, that it doesn't do very well at that, because what happens is it still kicks over that and can come back. So the Humboldt offered quite a lot better locking onto the stump. So The other alternative that came about from Scandinavia, and sometimes you heard it on the West Coast called the bird's mouth or the deep V notch, and that's what today is called the open face. The open face was kind of pioneered into the States and in North America by a gentleman, a Swedish logger named Soren Eriksson, and I had the opportunity to work with Soren for quite a number of years in steel, with steel chainsaws, and then later with Husqvarna. And we basically traveled around doing the training and me assisting him, and I learned quite a lot and the whole concept behind the open face technique. It's a notch that's written up to be 70 degrees or more. In other words, you could come down the face of the tree and be able to open it up to 90 degrees. You could open up the bottom cut or the lower cut and be able to open it up even more if there was a hillside or a reason to keep that notch and hinge in control longer. And so that's something that he really passed along to me, and seeing how it works. But the thing is that we're discussing these questions more on a week along with ForestApps, and it's something where the quality of tree falling or even large limb pruning, sawyers agree that a notch is important. A lot of times I hear with roadway work and right-of-way that sometimes they just slash the trees down, especially smaller ones. I don't know what the maximum diameter that they would look at would be, but more or less they think that it's not necessary to steer that. If it's leaning in the right direction, then just let her go. But whatever you want to call it, that's not the most important thing. The most important thing is realizing that the notch allows the hinge to work. And so as we think through that process, the opening of that notch is what allows that hinge to go from the back of its fiber to the face of its fiber in the apex of the notch without breaking, without losing control. That's really the most important thing. It allows the hinge to work. That's the function of the notch. Reasons for a notch and hinge, and that's important that people look at that and understand how it works. Number one is safety. It gives you a better ability to be able to maintain your work area. And as soon as the tree starts to move, you don't have to be there trying to steer the tree or wonder what's going to happen. You can release the tree and go to an escape route, be back far enough to watch the top and any kind of struck by situations that might be coming out, limbs or tops breaking or smaller trees coming back into your work area. It also gives you control. In other words, you can use that face notch to line up in direction. Given your leans and your offsets to the crowns, you can be able to control that by directing that notch where you want that tree to go. And that gives you a steering ability with that. And so that's the main reason: safety, control, and steering. Going back to the Humboldt, it gives you those things, but it usually requires a little higher stump, which in logging sometimes that's an issue. But it does require a higher stump. You can't cut flush with it as far as right to the ground. It's harder for most people to match up the notch apex. That apex being the back corner of the notch. So you can easily, without bending over and looking into that combination of upper and lower cuts, it's very easy to have an overcut on one or the other, and they call that a Dutchman. In other words, if you have a notch there and the hinge is coming up right to the apex of that notch doesn't give any resistance until the notch closes. But if you've got a bypass or a Dutchman in that back corner of the apex, it really starts to stress the hinge first. It can pop it off. It can cause pulled fiber. That's a combination of the high stump, which leaves boards left on the stump, or splits and pulls at the fiber. That's something that it's important to try to reduce those things. things. Done correctly, the Humboldt is a great technique to use, because it does kind of lock onto the stump a little bit, and the butt falls faster than the top to reduce a lot of shatter when it comes to that. But it's something where that doesn't necessarily mean that everything is perfect. Oftentimes, too, something that I hear is that people would cut the face notch using the Humboldt back into the tree farther. And I guess this is true if you have a tree that's 10-foot diameter and it's got 3 foot of back lean. If you cut into 4 feet, you have a forward-leaning tree. But the notch doesn't tip the tree. I hear that quite often. I put the notch in to tip the tree in that direction. It doesn't tip it in that direction. It actually steers it once the tree tips. What causes the tree to tip is the center weight of the canopy in front or behind the hinge. If the weight center of the canopy falls in front of the hinge, you have a forward-leaning tree. It's gonna fall on its own. If that center weight falls behind the tree, then it's going to be a back-leaning tree. It's going to require a wedge or a rope or something to tilt that weight forward of the hinge to take it forward. So the depth of the notch doesn't make it tip. Also, the depth of the notch doesn't necessarily make the tree easier to move. I hear that quite often. Although it is true that, and we can talk about this, the segments in the tree to be able to calculate lift and movement. The closer you are to the hinge, any lift or pull, the faster it's going to move. But if you are closer to the hinge, also you have to think about it takes more power to move it. You'd have to be able to lift more weight with the wedge to do that. So that's kind of an offset there. And it's removing the material that creates less resistance is really what's happening there. So that's what causes the movement to happen. In other words, if you cut a big notch into the tree and then you start to look at the actual lifting of the tree forward, the thinner the hinge, the less wood material you have there, the easier the tree is going to move. So if you cut a real deep notch into it, then you start a back cut, it more or less has a less fiber resistance there, so it does move. But you can also end up losing control of the tree, because the farther you make that notch into the tree on the stump, the more likely it is to go backwards. So that's a key thing to be considering if you have a back leaner tree. You don't want to go real deep into the face, because it can break off and go backwards very quickly. When they look at the common notch, which a lot of people use that, and really a common notch can be 70 degrees or more and be considered an open face notch, and that just keeps your hinge working longer. It enables it to stay attached and reduces the reason to stay there with it. You can be able to set that up to get the steering that you need, which can be done with the Humboldt also. But the open face, I think one thing that makes a big factor is we generally do the top cut first, and that's the same thing you would do on a Humboldt. You do the upper cut first, and then the lower cut second. You can look into that top cut on an open face and be able to make it meet exact. And if you have 70 degrees or more on that face notch opening, that allows you to quickly be able to see if you have any bypass or Dutchman in that back apex corner of the notch. So a big advantage there. Also, your chainsaws are set up with felling sights on them that you can easily, if you do the top cut first, look down the top of the saw to your target area. Same thing with a Humboldt. As you cut the top cut in level to the ground in most cases, you're able to look down that felling sight and see where the direction is. So direction is the same on both of them. But it's pretty neat when you start to think about how that works. But so important to think about, the actual ability of the notch to allow the hinge to work. And that's the key there. So that's a little bit of talk for today, and we hope to discuss this some more on future editions. I want to thank y'all for dropping by and learning a little bit of that stump stuff, and we will discuss more in the next edition of Along the ForestApps Road. So this is Tim Hard, and we hope to see you along the ForestApps Road in the future. We wish you good sawing.